Most people picture Jonah inside the fish as a children's story scene, a man sitting in a dark cave, waiting for time to pass. The truth is something else entirely. What actually happened inside that animal involved acid capable of dissolving bone, absolute darkness, and zero breathable oxygen. This is the story you were never told. Before anything else, understand the context. We are around 860 before the Common Era. The Neo-Assyrian Empire dominates the Fertile Crescent with a brutality no previous civilization had matched. The empire's capital, Nineveh, sits on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, in the territory that corresponds today to northern Iraq, near the modern city of Mosul. Nineveh is no ordinary city. Archaeological records excavated by Austin Henry Layard, beginning in 1845, revealed walls approximately 12 kilometers in length, with 15 monumental gates, each guarded by stone colossi weighing up to 20 tons. The estimated population exceeds 120,000 inhabitants, as stated in the text of Jonah chapter 4, verse 11 itself. Put that in perspective. 120,000 people in a single city of the ancient world is the equivalent of filling a stadium the size of the Maracanã and more than half of another. And that entire city sustained itself on tribute torn from conquered nations, including the northern kingdom of Israel. Jonah, son of Amittai, is not an unknown figure. According to 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 25, he had already prophesied the restoration of Israel's borders during the reign of Jeroboam II. That detail changes everything. Jonah is not a frightened novice. He is a seasoned prophet, recognized by the king, with a track record of fulfilled prophecies, and that is precisely why the divine command recorded in Jonah chapter 1, verse 2, lands with such force. Arise, go to the great city of Nineveh and cry out against it. The God of Israel is sending his most trusted prophet to preach mercy to Israel's most brutal enemy. Examine the details of what the Assyrians actually did. The reliefs carved into the palaces of Nineveh, now displayed in the British Museum, show systematic scenes of impalement, the flaying of prisoners alive, and mass deportation. Sennacherib, just a few reigns later, boasts in his clay prisms of having deported 208,000 people in a single campaign. The Assyrians did not merely conquer, they transformed destruction into political propaganda. Jonah knew this, every Israelite knew it, and now this prophet receives the order to offer a chance to the people who peeled the skin from his compatriots. Jonah's reaction is the most human moment in the entire Bible. He does not protest. He does not negotiate. He does not ask for an explanation. He simply runs. Jonah chapter 1 verse 3 records that he goes down to Joppa, present-day Jaffa, on the Mediterranean coast of Israel, and finds a ship bound for Tarshish. Regarding Tarshish, there is academic debate. Most scholars, including archaeologist William Foxwell Albright, identify Tarshish with Tartessos on the southwestern coast of the Iberian Peninsula in present-day Spain. The distance between Joppa and Tartessos is approximately 3,500 kilometers across the Mediterranean. Nineveh lay roughly 900 kilometers to the east. Jonah does not merely refuse the mission, he moves in the exact opposite direction as far as 8th century BCE naval technology would allow. Think about the logistics of that escape. Phoenician ships of the period, known as gaulo, were round-hulled merchant vessels averaging 20 to 30 meters in length, with a capacity of around 400 amphorae of cargo. Average speed under favorable wind conditions was 4 to 5 knots, approximately 8 kilometers per hour. A crossing to Tartessos would take between 40 and 60 days, depending on stops at intermediate ports such as Cyprus, Crete, and Sicily. Jonah pays the full fare. The Hebrew text uses the expression sekara, the total price. On a Phoenician merchant vessel, where every square meter represented commercial revenue, paying passenger fare meant compensating for the loss of cargo space. It was not cheap, and then nature struck back. Jonah chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, describes the Lord hurling a great wind upon the sea, and a mighty tempest arose. The Hebrew term used is sa'ar gadol, not a simple rainstorm, but a violent cyclonic storm. The eastern Mediterranean is especially prone to sudden storms between October and March. Winds of up to 130 kilometers per hour can form when cold air masses from Europe collide with warm currents off the African coast. Phoenician sailors, the most experienced mariners of the ancient world, were not men who frightened easily. They had circumnavigated Africa under orders from Pharaoh Necho II. They knew the sea like no one else. And these hardened professionals were terrified. Observe the scene the text describes with precision. Every sailor cries out to his own god. The ship carried a multi-religious crew, typical of Phoenician vessels that recruited from various Mediterranean ports. They throw the cargo overboard to lighten the weight. A commercial Phoenician amphora weighed between 25 and 30 kilograms when full. If the ship carried 300 to 400 amphorae, that is 8 to 12 tons of merchandise thrown into the waves, the equivalent of 6 or 7 passenger cars dumped into the ocean. And it made no difference. Jonah was asleep in the hold. That detail is devastating and is almost always overlooked. The prophet who flees a divine mission is not anguished, sleepless, or consumed by guilt, as one might expect. He is in a deep sleep. The Hebrew term radam, used in Jonah chapter 1, verse 5, describes an extremely heavy sleep, almost a stupor. Some rabbinic commentators, including Rashi, suggest it was the kind of sleep that comes with extreme emotional exhaustion, the body shutting down in the face of a tension the mind can no longer process. The captain descends into the hold and wakes him. The irony is brutal. A pagan man having to rouse a prophet of the living God. Then comes the moment of the lots. The crew casts lots to determine who is responsible for the storm. Jonah chapter 1, verse 7. The practice of casting lots was universal in the ancient world. Fragments of bone, marked stones, or ceramic dice were used by cultures from Egypt to Mesopotamia to consult the gods about the causes of misfortune. The lot falls on Jonah, and he confesses everything. I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And I am fleeing from his presence. The sailors' reaction reveals something that is rarely discussed. They do not throw Jonah overboard immediately. Jonah chapter 1, verses 13 and 14 shows that they first try to row back to land. Pagan men in a panic, risking their own lives rather than kill a fugitive prophet, and the sea only grows worse. They row against waves that swell with every passing minute. The physical toll of rowing a Phoenician Gaulois against a Mediterranean storm is unimaginable. Each stroke required the coordinated force of at least 2 men per oar, their arms bearing a load equivalent to pushing 120 kilograms against the resistance of churning water. Only when every alternative has failed do they, in prayer, cast Jonah into the sea. The sea stopped instantly. Now comes the central moment of this narrative. Jonah chapter 1 verse 17 records in Hebrew, Vayaman Adonai dag gadol livloa et Jonah. The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. The Hebrew verb manah, translated as prepared or appointed, does not imply the instantaneous creation of a new animal. It means to designate, to assign, to name for a specific function. The animal already existed. It was directed. The biological identity of this animal has generated centuries of debate. The Hebrew text says, dag gadol, great fish. The Greek translation of the Septuagint uses ketos mega, great sea creature. Matthew chapter 12, verse 40 in the New Testament also employs ketos, which in the Greek tradition could refer to any large sea monster. The whale is not the only candidate. The whale shark, the largest fish on the planet, reaches up to 18 meters in length and possesses a pharyngeal cavity large enough to contain a human body, though it feeds by filtration. The sperm whale, which can reach 20 meters and weigh 50 tons, has a lower jaw up to 5 meters long and an esophagus that, though narrow by its own standards, would be the most anatomically viable among cetaceans for swallowing something the size of a man. The great white shark, at up to 6 meters, has been documented with intact human remains in its stomach. But the Mediterranean of the 8th century before the Common Era also hosted healthy populations of basking sharks, which reached 12 meters. The biological question, however, is secondary to the medical one. Consider what happens to a human body inside the digestive system of a large marine animal. The stomach of a sperm whale contains hydrochloric acid with a pH between 1 and 2, strong enough to dissolve the beaks of giant squid that form the basis of its diet. Human skin begins to suffer chemical burns within minutes of exposure to a pH below 2. Within hours, the upper layers of the epidermis begin to break down. Hair comes under attack. The mucous membranes of the eyes, nose, and mouth would be the first to sustain severe damage. And that is only the beginning. The concentration of oxygen inside the stomach of a large marine animal is virtually non-existent. What little air exists is composed primarily of methane and carbon dioxide, byproducts of the bacterial fermentation of digested food. A human being in an environment with an oxygen concentration below 6% loses consciousness in under 1 minute. Below 4%, brain death begins in 3 to 4 minutes. Jonah remained in that environment for 3 days and 3 nights, as recorded in Jonah chapter 1, verse 17. 72 hours. No conventional biological explanation resolves that equation. And that is precisely why the text does not attempt to offer one. The biblical account treats the event as direct divine intervention, not as an explicable natural phenomenon. The fish was appointed. Survival was maintained. The exit was commanded. The text does not concern itself with explaining the mechanics, because the mechanics are not the point. But the suffering inside the animal is absolutely real. And Jonah's prayer from within the fish confirms it with visceral detail. Follow what Jonah describes in his prayer, recorded in chapter 2. Verses 2 through 9 constitute one of the most intense poetic texts in the entire Old Testament. Jonah says he cried to the Lord out of his distress, and uses the Hebrew word zara, which describes extreme compression, physical and emotional constriction simultaneously. He says he was cast into the deep, into the heart of the seas. The current surrounded him. All the waves and billows passed over him. The term tehom, the abyss, appears, the same term used in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, to describe the primordial chaos before creation. Jonah is experiencing a symbolic return to nothingness. Notice the detail of verse 5. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The literal Hebrew is even more brutal. The waters reached nephesh, to the throat, to the point where breath is extinguished. Seaweed wrapped around his head. This is not metaphor. Inside the digestive system of a large marine animal, remnants of marine vegetation, algae, kelp, phytoplankton, mix with the digestive contents. Jonah was submerged in that decomposing organic mass. He went down to the roots of the mountains. Verse 6. The bars of the earth closed upon him forever. That is the closest expression ancient Hebrew had for describing the sensation of being permanently imprisoned. Jonah believed he would die there. The word forever is not dramatization. It is the genuine perception of a man who saw no possible way out. 3 days and 3 nights. Calculate that duration in terms of human experience. No light, no temporal reference, no room to move. The interior of a large stomach contracts rhythmically in peristaltic movements that compress its contents with a force equivalent to several kilograms per square centimeter. Each contraction would push Jonah's body against muscular walls, coated in acid-laced mucus. The internal temperature of a sperm whale runs approximately 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. In an unventilated environment saturated with toxic gases and extreme humidity, the thermal sensation would be suffocating. The psychological toll of 72 hours in total darkness and extreme confinement is well documented by modern medicine. Sensory deprivation studies conducted at McGill University in the 1950s showed that healthy volunteers began experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations after just 48 hours of moderate sensory deprivation, and those volunteers were in climate-controlled environments, fed and hydrated. Jonah had none of those conditions. The cortisol levels, the stress hormone that his body produced over those hours, would have caused measurable damage to the hippocampus, the region of the brain responsible for memory and emotional regulation. But Jonah prayed, and that is the core of the entire narrative. At the lowest point, physically inside an animal, spiritually at the bottom of the abyss, emotionally convinced he was going to die, Jonah does not bargain, does not promise, does not negotiate. He worships. Verse 9 of chapter 2. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. A man covered in gastric acid, wrapped in seaweed, compressed by muscular walls, in absolute darkness, declaring gratitude. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and the fish vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Jonah chapter 2, verse 10. The Hebrew verb vayake, to vomit, to regurgitate, is graphically specific. It was not a gentle exit. The animal's digestive system expelled Jonah with the same violence with which it would expel any undigested foreign body. The impact of being hurled from inside a marine animal onto a solid surface would have been equivalent to a fall of 2 to 3 meters, enough to cause bruising, but not serious fractures. The physical condition of Jonah upon emerging deserves attention. Although the biblical text does not describe his appearance, prolonged exposure to gastric acid would have produced visible and drastic effects: extensive chemical burns across the skin, partial or total loss of hair, intense discoloration of the skin, a cadaverous pallor with reddened areas where the burning had been most severe. The mucous membranes of his eyes would have been inflamed and possibly damaged. His voice would have been compromised by exposure of the vocal cords to acid vapors. There is an interesting parallel historical case: the sailor James Bartley, supposedly swallowed by a sperm whale in 1891 near the Falkland Islands, and rescued alive 15 hours later when the whale was opened on deck. Although the Bartley case is intensely disputed by historians, the accounts describe his skin as permanently discolored and bleached in the areas that had been exposed. Now consider what happens next. Jonah, in that physically devastated condition, receives the command a second time. Jonah chapter 3, verse 2. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. This time he goes. Jonah's walk to Nineveh is a journey that is rarely discussed, but that reveals the magnitude of the commitment. From the eastern Mediterranean coast to Nineveh is approximately 900 kilometers in a straight line. Along the viable overland route of the period, following trade roads that pass through Aleppo before descending through the Euphrates Valley to the Tigris, the actual distance would have been 1,000 to 1,200 kilometers. The average speed of a traveler on foot in the ancient world was 25 to 30 kilometers per day. Jonah would have taken between 35 and 45 days to reach Nineveh, more than a month of walking, with skin still in the process of healing, likely still bearing visible lesions. And here, a dimension emerges that transforms the entire narrative. Consider Jonah's appearance as he enters Nineveh. A man with visibly damaged, discolored skin, bearing marks that no disease known to the Assyrians could explain. The Assyrians possessed extensive medical texts. The diagnostic tablets from Ashurbanipal's library, discovered at Nineveh, catalogue hundreds of dermatological conditions. A man with Jonah's appearance would have corresponded to none of them. He would have looked like someone who had returned from the dead, someone who had passed through Sheol, the realm of the dead, and come back. Jonah enters Nineveh and proclaims a single sentence, Jonah chapter 3 verse 4, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." In Hebrew it is only 5 words, Od arbaim yom venineveh nepaket. There is no emotional appeal, no call to repentance, no theological explanation, only the raw announcement of destruction in 40 days. Nineveh's response is the most improbable moment in the entire Bible. The people believed God. They called a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. Jonah chapter 3 verse 5. The king of Nineveh himself, possibly Adad Nirari III or Assur Nirari V, depending on the dating, rose from his throne, removed his royal robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. The ritual humiliation of an Assyrian monarch has no parallel in the history of the ancient Near East. Assyrian kings presented themselves as direct representatives of Ashur, the supreme god of the Assyrian pantheon. They did not humble themselves, ever, not even in military defeat. And now one of them is sitting in ashes because of 5 words spoken by a disfigured foreign prophet. The royal decree that follows goes even further. Jonah chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. "Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water. Let them be covered with sackcloth, both men and animals, and let them call out mightily to God." The fast included the animals. In logistical terms, Nineveh possessed thousands of head of cattle, sheep, horses, and draft animals. Depriving all of them of water and food was a catastrophic economic decision. Animals begin to suffer severe dehydration after 24 hours without water and can die within 3 to 5 days, depending on species and climate. The king was prepared to risk the loss of a significant portion of his capital's livestock wealth. And God saw their works and relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them. Jonah chapter 3, verse 10. The city was spared, and here the text reveals the most unsettling layer of the entire story. Jonah chapter 4, verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. The prophet is furious because Nineveh was saved. And in verse 2, he finally reveals what had been driving his flight from the very beginning. He knew. He had known from the start that God was gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Jonah did not flee out of fear. He did not flee out of cowardice. He fled because he knew that if he went, God would spare Nineveh. And he did not want Nineveh to be spared. Weigh the raw honesty of that moment. A prophet of God openly stating that he preferred the destruction of 120,000 people to having to accept divine mercy extended to the enemy. And more, in verse 3, Jonah asks to die. "It is better for me to die than to live." He preferred his own death to living with the reality that God loves even the Assyrians. The final scene of the book is one of the most extraordinary in all of ancient literature. God causes a plant to grow. The Hebrew text uses kikayon, identified by most botanists as Ricinus communis, the castor plant, an extremely fast-growing species that can reach 3 to 4 meters in height within a few weeks and produces broad leaves up to 60 centimeters in diameter, ideal for shade. The plant grows in a single night and shelters Jonah from the sun. Jonah chapter 4 verse 6 says he was exceedingly glad because of the plant. It is the only moment in the entire book in which Jonah shows genuine happiness, not for the salvation of 120,000 people, for a plant. The next morning God appointed a worm. The verb is the same. Manna, appointed, designated. The same verb used for the fish. The worm attacked the plant and it withered. Then God appointed a scorching east wind. The Ruach Kadim, the east wind that sweeps across the Mesopotamian desert, can drive temperatures above 45 degrees Celsius with humidity below 10%. The sun beat down on Jonah's head. He fainted and asked to die again. The question God asks Jonah is the last line of the book, and it is not quite a question. It is a declaration clothed in confrontation. You pity the plant, for which you did not labor and which you did not make, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? Silence. The book ends there. No answer from Jonah, no resolution, no dramatic reconciliation. The Hebrew text simply stops, and that silence is more powerful than any conclusion could ever be. The reader, and now the viewer, is the one who must respond. Archaeology confirms that Nineveh continued to exist and flourish after the period of Jonah. The city reached its apex under Sennacherib, around 705 to 681 before the Common Era, when the king constructed the famous palace without rival, with more than 70 rooms decorated with stone reliefs covering nearly 3,000 square meters of walls. Nineveh fell only in 612 before the Common Era, when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes besieged the city. The Tigris River, swollen by abnormal rains, destroyed a section of the walls, exactly as the prophet Nahum had foretold in Nahum chapter 2, verse 6. The destruction was so complete that the precise location of Nineveh was forgotten for more than 2,000 years until the excavations of the 19th century. The temporal gap between Nineveh's repentance under Jonah and its final destruction is approximately 150 years. 150 years of additional existence that an entire city received because a reluctant prophet, his skin disfigured by the acid of a fish, walked 1,000 kilometers to speak 5 words he did not want to say. The parallel that forces itself upon us is unavoidable. Matthew chapter 12 verses 40 and 41 records that Jesus mentioned Jonah directly, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The structural parallel is precise. Descent into the abyss, duration in darkness, and an emergence that leads to a message of repentance extended to those who had not deserved it. Biblical text historians, including the German scholar Hans Walter Wolff, have observed that Jonah functions as one of the most elaborate typological prefigurations in the entire Old Testament, not merely because of the 3-day duration, but because of the complete pattern of apparent death, supernatural preservation, and a subsequent mission directed toward those who stood outside the covenant. What remains after all the archaeological data, all the medical analysis, and all the historical reconstruction is something no academic discipline can catalogue. A man who chose to die at the bottom of the sea rather than obey. A God who used the digestive system of an animal to build a prayer room. A city of murderers that covered itself in ashes. And a book that ends without an answer. Because the answer was never about Jonah. The answer was always about whoever is listening.